the Swift group. My name is Moina,
My name is Celine.
and PJ will be at the end of this recording.
So the first question that we had to answer is if there was object-oriented programming in our language. Swift is built to be designed around object-oriented programming, just because it is designated for creating apps in iOS. So it has its own features for just iOS, and there's a new deinitializing method, so you can do any cleanup after the app is being done used. And a lot of its programming is similar to Java object-oriented programming. So you'll see a lot of methods. It has its own properties and a constructor, which is the initialization method. So even though it has object-oriented programming, Swift does not support any abstract data types, since everything must be declared and has to have a distinct declared object. So you have to be specific every time you declare a new variable or data type. And then there is multi-level inheritance in Swift. So as you can see here in this diagram, there is a class called animal, and it has the ability to eat, or has a function called eat. And then the class dog can inherit from animal, and you could create its own methods in the subclass, and it will inherit everything from the animal class. It's very similar to Java multi-level inheritance, and just different from the way it usually declares if it's inheriting from the higher class.
So Swift does support both static binding and dynamic binding. When we're doing a dynamic dispatch, it's usually in the form of polymorphism, which is subclassing and overriding existing methods. And then when we're doing static dispatch, it ensures that the class and methods cannot be overridden with keywords being used with final and static. So on the left-hand side, we have an example of a dynamic dispatch in Swift. Here, we create a struct called dynamic, and then we implement its own functions. So when we create the struct, it will call the dynamically call function, and then we're able to use all the functions that we have declared for it. Then on the right, static is a lot more simpler. It has an initializer, and we can add our own methods to it as well. And with the static keyword, if a class was to inherit from this from the struct, it cannot override it. So in this case, if another class inherits static, it cannot override the function. So Swift does not support the standard feature of multiple inheritance. Although a class can only inherit from only one class, a class can confirm to multiple protocols. In Swift, a protocol is a blueprint of methods, properties, and other requirements that suit a particular task or piece of functionality, and it must also confirm to mixins. In Swift, a mixin is a class that contains methods for use by other classes without having to be the parent class of those other classes. And in my opinion, I think that multiple inheritance is a useful feature to have in a program. It allows for better categorization of classes and subclasses, can reuse those inherited attributes and methods versus then writing multiple methods and other attributes for a specific class. So here we're going to simulate multiple inheritance with the use of protocols and mixins. Here we are creating classes blinkable, scalable, and corners rounded as protocols. Then we're going to make a UI view, an extension of these classes with the respective methods. So this is the creation of the extension UI view. When we create the object A view and call each function from the simulated inheritance, it is able to execute all three methods at once. So here we're showing two separate instances on a yellow square and hello world.
Are there any additional OOP features supported by your language that are not supported by Java? Well, Java has classes, objects, properties, methods, abstraction, encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. As for Swift, they have classes, objects, properties, methods, access control, encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, method overriding, method overloading, and polymorphism. An example that they differ in object-oriented programming features is under inheritance for Java, the code would be class child extends parents if the child is trying to access the parents, whereas for Swift, the code would be class child semicolon parents. In my opinion, does your language support object-oriented programming in a better way than Java, or the opposite? So I believe Java is better supported in terms of object-oriented programming, because although Swift supports object-oriented programming features, Java's object-oriented programming design allows more readability and compatibility. The Java code is easier to read and is more universally used in object-oriented programming than Swift.